Good afternoon and welcome to our weekly class on Ethics of the Fathers. We're up to the first chapter and it's the 14th Mishna, the 14th paragraph. And it's a continuation of Hillel's teachings. The first teaching of Hillel focused on how we have to pursue peace, love people, and draw them close to the Torah. The second Mishnah was one about how people should not seek fame and recognition, and as a result of their egos, they may not want to teach others, and they might want to use the Torah for their own personal benefits. That's all negated by Hillel. And here's the third paragraph of Hillel's teachings. Hu haya omer, it says, he used to say. Last week I mentioned that a possibility that the Hebrew word he, which is who is he and he is she. This is very confusing. But we're living in a time when he is she and she is he. So maybe that's, anyhow, seriously speaking, the word who has a spiritual message. Those three letters that make up the word who are the letters of God's throne and God's name that were cut off by Amalek, the wicked nation Amalek. And that the message here is going to be one in which we restore those letters. We correct the destructive force of Amalek. But we'll get to that a little bit later. But what did he say? He said, if I am not for myself, who is for me? But if I am for my own self only, what am I? And if not now, when? What exactly is the message over here? The simple understanding of this is a person has to recognize that he or she has two roles in life. There is the role that we play as individuals, and there's the role that we play as members of a community, a communal, or a national focus as part of a Jewish nation, a collective. There are societies today in this world and throughout history that focused on the communal. You had to sacrifice everything for the country, and you had no personal rights or any interest in your own life. You were just there to serve the communal. And then there are societies, America seems to be more in this direction, that focuses on the individual rights and freedoms, sometimes at the expense of the community. Judaism does not recognize either extreme. Judaism combines both personal responsibilities and by extension rights, and communal responsibilities and by extension rights. And that's, in the words of Hillel, if I am not for myself, if all I think about is the community, I have no personal role in life in Judaism, that's not the proper approach. You have to have a recognition that you do have a personal role. But then, on the other hand, if a person only has, if I'm for my own self only, if all I focus on is my personal growth, personal responsibilities, but I don't recognize my communal role, what am I? By myself, I don't have the strength and the power to accomplish whatever I have to accomplish. I need the community to enhance, to supplement, to enhance, and to strengthen the power that I have as an individual. This dual focus on community and individual is probably unique to Judaism, because they're not just two valid focuses, but they're very strongly pronounced. Usually when you want to have two conflicting values, you usually compromise on something in between. If it's you don't want hot, you don't want cold, you have lukewarm. Judaism is not into lukewarm. Judaism is about combining extremes. It may look like it's moderation, it may look like it's lukewarm, but it's not lukewarm. Judaism takes the personal obligation to its extreme, that every individual is like a whole universe. It says in the Talmud that when you take one life, or you save one life, it's like saving the whole universe. And at the same time, Judaism has a very radical view of the power of the Jewish nation as a nation. One does not necessarily have to compromise the other. They're both focuses, and we can combine the two. And even though they may seem to be opposites, the Jewish people were endowed with this power to combine opposites. There was a Yiddish writer who was a Holocaust survivor. His name was Dr. Hillel Zeidman. Hillel, the same name as the author of this Mishna. And he had a relationship with the Rebbe, and he wrote about it. And he wrote about something that he found that was very striking to him. When he had private meetings with the Rebbe, when he came to the Rebbe with his family and asking for a blessing for himself, for his family, the Rebbe always steered the conversation to what he can do for the Jewish people. Then when he would come to a Farbrengen, a gathering where thousands of people were there, and the Rebbe was addressing thousands of people and the whole of the Jewish nation, people could hear it on hookups. Those days we had telephone hookups. We're able to hear the Rebbe speaking here in Buffalo. So here the Rebbe is focusing on the communal, and the Rebbe would turn around in between talks and turn to Dr. Hillel Zeidman and start talking to him about his family. He said what was striking is when he came as a private person, the Rebbe was able to steer the conversation to the community, and whenever he was in a communal situation, the Rebbe steered the conversation to his personal needs and interests. What the Rebbe was doing was showing that not only are they not two conflicting focuses, they're interdependent. One supports and strengthens the other. And as much as the Rebbe was a leader of a people, of a whole nation, a spiritual leader, the Rebbe never lost focus from individuals, always showing interest in individual people's lives, as if he had no other worries in the world. And this is something that people would say. The Rebbe would have meetings with people. In the early years, it was 2 or 3 nights a week, and would go from 8 p.m. to 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 a.m. Sometimes it would go for 12 hours where people would come to see him. And in one night it could be like 100 people. So if you took more time, the Rebbe would have to be up later and later and later, and then he would start his next day on time. So people would feel that the Rebbe would be rushed because he had to see so many people. This is what people would report. Whenever you were in the Rebbe's room, you felt such peace, so not being rushed. The Rebbe had all the time in the world for you. Never a sense of, I'm pretty busy. I have more important people to talk to tonight. I have a prime minister of Israel to talk to. I have a professor to talk to about deep philosophical matters. I have this businessman to talk to about supporting institutions. You're just an individual. You're just a simple person. You never felt that. You felt that the Rebbe had nothing else in the world but you. And this would go on for 12 hours sometimes straight, without any interruption, without any break. So when he dealt with the community, he focused on the individual. When he dealt with the individual, he focused on the community. That is one of the messages of this Mishnah. And it ties in with Mishnah, with the calendar, this Shabbos is going to be the Shabbos in which we bless the new month of Adar. And it's also a Shabbos when we're going to have an extra Torah reading which deals with a Half-Shekel. What's the Half-Shekel? In Israel, when the temple stood, every Jew had to contribute a Half-Shekel to the temple. And from those funds, they would bring all the sacrifices throughout the year. And the question is asked, and it says in the Torah that if you're rich, don't give more than a half. If you're poor, don't give less than a Half-Shekel. Everyone had to give the same amount. And the question is asked, why only a Half-Shekel? Why not make it a whole shekel? Why half? And one of the answers is the recognition that you cannot exist by yourself. A Jew has to be connected to his fellow Jew, or else he can't flourish. And that's one of the messages of this Mishnah. If I am not for myself, who is for me? On one hand, I have to do things on my own. But if I'm only for myself, if I don't recognize that I'm only a half and there's another Half-Shekel, then what am I? You can't exist unless you recognize that in addition to your personal role in life, you also have a communal role, and the two go together. Yes?
What's the equivalent of a Half-Shekel in today's currency?
It's talking about Half-Shekel as a silver, so I don't know what the price of silver is. I couldn't give you the exact amount, but it's not that much. I mean, it didn't impoverish people to give a Half-Shekel. Yes?
I always thought that the Half-Shekel was the demarcation or the acknowledgement that one person has the totality of a soul, a completion or a complement in another. So I would offer my Half-Shekel, and wherever my other half was, they would offer their Half-Shekel.
Well, that's the idea that you're only a half. You need the other half to make you complete. That means even though you as an individual have your own personal role in life, as if you're the only person in the world, no one else exists except for you, every person has to say, it says in the Talmud, that the world was created for me, just for me. No one else matters. I'm the only one in the world. That's one extreme. You kill one person, destroy the universe. You save one life, you save the universe. And at the same time, you have to recognize you're only a half. This is the paradox of Judaism, and that's what Hillel is espousing over here, this paradox. Now, it's interesting that Hillel became the leader because of a certain incident that occurred. I alluded to it in last week or 2 weeks ago. What is the incident that occurred? Hillel came from Babylonia, and then he moved, when he was young, he moved to Israel to study under Shmaya and Abtalion, the two great leaders at the time. And then he went back to Babylonia. And then he came back to Israel. And when he came back to Israel, an incident occurred. Who were the leaders that succeeded Shmaya and Avtalion? They were Bnei Beseira, the sons of a man called Beseira. These were two sages who took over the leadership of the Sanhedrin. And it was now Pesach, Passover was coming, and Passover that year was a Saturday night. So Saturday, on Shabbos, that's the time when you would have to bring the Karban Pesach, the Paschal offering. And the question was asked, because it's rare that the Erev Pesach, the Eve of Pesach, should be on a Shabbos. So the people asked, are we allowed to bring the offering and do all the work on Shabbos? It would be a violation of Shabbos. And they didn't know what the answer was. So someone said, 1 second, there's a guy who just came from Babylonia, Hillel, who's a great sage. Let's ask him. And he gave the answer. And what was his answer? He said, yes, it does override the Shabbos. Why? Because there's a law that whatever services in the temple were not just individual services, but were communal, and they were designated to a certain time, that overrides the Shabbos. That's why in the temple they would bring sacrifices every Shabbos. What kind of sacrifices? Communal ones. Private ones would not be offered on Shabbos. Only the communal ones. And the Hillel established that the Paschal offering is considered to be a communal offering because it was brought in groups of people. you didn't just come as an individual, you came in a group, in a collective of many individuals together. Every person would have to register to a lamb to be that Paschal offering, and each lamb would be registered to many, many people. So it has the status of a communal offering, and therefore it overrides the Shabbos because it's designated for a specific time and it's communal. And there was B'nai Beseira, the two leaders, were so impressed with Hillel's scholarship that no one could answer the question that they abdicated. They said, we're not worthy to be the leaders, let Hillel take over. And that's when Hillel became the leader. So what prompted Hillel to become the leader? It was his ruling concerning the Paschal offering. Now the Paschal offering is a paradox. It's a private offering. It's brought not from communal funds. Each person had to pay for his own lamb. Each individual brought it as an individual, but it was brought in groups of people. So it had both a private status and a public status. Isn't that interesting that Hillel, who's now talking about private versus public and combining the two, he was promoted to leadership because he recognized the private and public role of the Korban Pesach, of the Paschal offering. He embodied that ability that Hillel was able to focus on individual and the community at the same time. You know the story I think I mentioned last week where a guy had made a bet with someone that he can get Hillel to get upset. He could get him angry. So he comes Friday afternoon when Hillel is bathing for Shabbos. He knocks on the door. Is Hillel live here? Yeah, Hillel. I have a very important question. Why does Africans have flat feet? And Hillel patiently gave him an answer. And then he comes back a few minutes later, knocks on the door. Is Hillel there? I have a very important question. And he asked these frivolous questions 3 times. And Hillel very patiently, with a smile on his face, answered him. And the man said, I wish that there would be no more Hillels in the world. He says, why? Because I lost $400 on a bet because of you. So Hillel was able to focus on an individual. What kind of individual? A lowlife. I mean, someone who was trying to... And Hillel is the head of the Supreme Court. Now it's a bad example to give nowadays because no one has respect for anyone if they don't politically align with your politics. But imagine this: you're the leader of the Jewish people, and some idiot comes when you're busy getting ready for Shabbos, and you have to run out of the shower with a towel around you to answer a stupid question. Hillel was able to see that the needs of an individual are primary, are very important. I'll share the story. I told the story many times with my nephew. My nephew was a student in the yeshiva in New Jersey, where my father was the Rosh Yeshiva, the head of the yeshiva. And one day he complained about an ingrown toenail. And my father took him to the doctor. The doctor says, we're going to have to cut it out. And he thought it meant he's going to have to amputate the toe. So he said, I'm not going to allow the doctor to touch me unless I get a blessing from the Rebbe. So my father said, I can't ask the Rebbe for a blessing for an ingrown toenail. The Rebbe would get life and death questions. He would be inundated every day with, the Rebbe's secretary, the average was 400 letters a day. That was the average. Some days he can get 1,000 letters. And so my nephew said, then if that's the case, I'm not going to let the doctor touch me. So my father calls up the Rebbe's secretary, Rabbi Groner. Rabbi Groner says, what can I do for you, Rabbi Greenberg? And my father says, I have a nephew, and he's looking pleadingly at I have a grandson, at my nephew, who's my father's grandson, of course. Please get me out of this. And the kid says, no, I want you to ask for a blessing for the ingrown toenail. So he asked Rabbi Groner, we need a blessing from the Rebbe for an ingrown toenail. And there's silence on the line. And Rabbi Groner says, okay, that his job is not to judge people's requests. He's the mailman. He just has to deliver it. So he writes down the name and the reason for the request for the blessing. He said, I'll put it on the pile of the Rebbe's desk. Because the Rebbe hadn't arrived yet to his office, and the Rebbe Groner would go into the Rebbe's office, put it on the pile. And my father didn't expect a response. I think within an hour, he got a response. And Rebbe Groner said something incredible happened. When the Rebbe came I put the note on the bottom of the pile. The Rebbe had a pile like that, and I put it on the bottom of the pile. Why? Because I thought there were more important things than an ingrown toenail. And when the Rebbe came into the room, He was looking for something. He went through the whole pile until he found the bottom note, and he gave a blessing for the ingrown toenail. What did the Rebbe demonstrate then? I'm not trying to tell the story to show you that the Rebbe had divine inspiration and he knew that there was a letter like that. And it's that he cared about a 14 or 15-year-old child, about a minor thing called an ingrown toenail. It wasn't minor. If that person felt it and he had to ask for a blessing, it wasn't minor. He didn't judge it by his own standards of what's major, what's minor. He judged it by the standards of the individual. That's an extreme example of how you focus on the individual. And you view the individual not through the prism of an adult, of a sophisticated person. You view the person based on their own level as an individual. And at the same time, the Rebbe would address international matters, communal matters, the status of Israel. The Rebbe would talk to prime ministers and great leaders, focusing on the community in the same extreme way that he focused on the individual. And that's what Hillel was doing. And Hillel was catapulted into leadership because he focused on the Paschal Lamb, which had individual and collective aspects to it. Another message over here: if I am not for myself, who is for me? There is a tendency that people have, and society encourages this tendency, to blame others for your problems. In other words, if there's a criminal who is violent, what do people say? It's not his fault, it's society's fault, because we didn't take care of his material needs. Whenever something goes wrong, we tend to not take responsibility, but to blame others and say it's their fault. If you would have done this for me, if you would have had this, given me this opportunity, I would have behaved differently. So Hillel is saying, if a person says, I'm not for myself, I'm not responsible, who is for me? There's no one else that you could blame, because every individual has to take full responsibility. Yes, it's true that when God judges us, or when we judge other people, we should always give them the benefit of the doubt. That's another message that we frequently find in the words of the ethics of the fathers. Don't judge a person until you're in that person's shoes. That's when you're judging someone else. You always try to see the benefit in others. But when you're judging yourself, don't look for excuses. You know why I didn't behave properly? Because my teachers were bad. Yes, it's true. Very often bad teachers cause students to mess up. But that's not going to get you anywhere. To put the blame on others is only going to prevent you from ever changing, because I don't have to change. It's not my fault. The way I am is the way I am. And that's what the excuse that people always use for not changing, says, I can't change. This is the way I am. This is what society gave me. This is what my teachers, my parents, my siblings, my peers, they caused me to be this way. And if that's the way one behaves, they'll never change. You have to take full responsibility for your own issues. You have to hope and pray that other people will judge you favorably, that God will judge you favorably. And when does God judge people favorably? When you judge others favorably as well. But when you judge yourself, you have to be brutally honest with yourself. And sometimes it's painful, but it's the only way you'll take responsibility. So, another point over here, the Rebbe mentions that Hillel was a teacher. That was his primary responsibility. He was the head of the Sanhedrin, but the head of the Sanhedrin judges people, but they're also the teachers. Maimonides writes that the oral Torah was entrusted in the hands of the Sanhedrin. the Jewish Supreme Court. They were the ones who were responsible for transmitting the oral Torah more than anyone else. They were the greatest scholars. So Hillel is the one in whose hands were entrusted the teachings of the Torah. And therefore, a person who has that role, he may say to himself that, why do I have to be the one to teach? Why do I have to be the one to spread the message? There are plenty of other people to do it. Why do I have to do it? So if a person says, if I'm not for myself, if I don't feel my responsibility to do the teaching and I put the onus on others, who is for me? I'm not going to, it shows that I have no value. You can't throw the onus, the burden on someone else and say it'll be done by someone else. You have to take responsibility for yourself. But at the same token, if you feel that you're doing it, you took responsibility, you don't need to consult with anyone else. That's also, what am I? So we have again this twin message. On one hand, you have to take responsibility, and you can't say that others will do it. Why do I have to do it? It'll be done by others. No, you can't do that. You have to take responsibility as if there's nobody else to do it. Someone once said that a person, when it comes to learning Torah, has to imagine that the page that he's learning is the only page that there is in existence. And that you're the only person who's around to study Torah, and this is the last day of your life. Imagine how you would attach yourself to that study. This is the only, because what if you have so much to study? You know what happens sometimes? I know it happens with me. I'm sitting down and thinking, what should I study now? I have a few books in my library, so I take out. I think of taking out one book and say, no, maybe the other one is better, more interesting, or more relevant. And the end was that I'm spending 5-10 minutes wasting on searching. But if I knew I have only one book, if you were on a deserted island, which book would you take with you? Imagine that's the only book that you have. How much attention you would give that book. But if you know if there are other people who could study, he says, I don't need to study. Other people could study for me. They'll do the teaching. They'll do the guidance. Then you might shirk your responsibility and you won't study the Torah. And if you know that you have a whole life ahead of you, but if you know this is your only day of life and it's the only book that you have and you're the only person, your whole attachment will be very different. So as an individual, you have to recognize that the responsibility is totally yours. You're the only one around, and it's the only opportunity you have. So if a person feels that way, they can take it to an extreme and says, okay, therefore the world stands on me. I'm in charge of everything. No, you have to consult with others. You have to discuss things with others as if you're just one little detail in a large collection of individuals that you depend on. And then it says, if not now, when? People have a tendency to procrastinate. They tell a story of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. He was the leader of the Musar movement, the Jewish ethics movement, about 150 years ago. That he was going at night, late at night, and he saw the shoemaker had his candle burning and working in his shoe, doing what shoemakers do, repairing shoes. So he goes into the store and he says to him, what are you doing up so late? Mending shoes now. It's very late. He says, as long as the candle still is burning, I have to do more work. And Rabbi Yisrael Salanter took that as a spiritual message. As long as the candle, our soul is called a candle, as long as we have life, we have a responsibility. There's no such thing as we reach a certain age, you have to take it easy. would retire. The Rebbe was very strongly against the whole concept of retirement. Now, it doesn't mean you have to do the same job for all your life. If you're a construction worker, it doesn't mean you have to do construction until you're 110 years old. But you can't retire from work. Whatever your work happens to be, you could always change the format of the work, but you can't just retire. The whole concept of retirement to the Rebbe was anathema, was something very distasteful. And it also shortens a person's life. When a person doesn't have any purpose, now, it doesn't mean a person has to even work. They can study Torah all day and all night, and that's their work. But you have to be productive. You can never come to a point where you say, I'm old enough, I worked my whole... I remember there was in Florida, near where my daughter lives, there was a very wealthy Jewish businessman who was totally devoted to philanthropy. He lived in the Northeast, and then he retired to Florida. And I think it was my daughter or my son-in-law approached this man about getting involved with the Chabad house where they lived in Jupiter, Florida, not Jupiter, the planet. And he says, I spent decades of my life doing philanthropy and doing communal work. Now I'm here to retire. I think he was dead within a half year. You can't. I can't tell you why he died, but it certainly was. You can't retire. You have to always be productive in one way or another. That's what gives you life physically and certainly spiritually. And as long as there's still a flame burning, it's never too late. And it's never time for you to retire from life. In one of the Rebbe's talks, he connects the story that I told you before about Hillel, that he was the one who gave the ruling that you can bring the Korban Pesach, the Paschal offering, even on Shabbos. Why? Because of two reasons. Number one, it's a communal offering. Even though it's individually mandated, it was brought together as a community. And number two, it's fixed in time. It has a fixed time. You can only do it the day before Passover. So the Rebbe says that it's hinted in this Mishnah. On one hand, he says, if I'm only for myself, yes, the Korban Pesach, the Paschal offering is a private thing. It's something I do as an individual. But if I only do it as an individual, what am I? I have to do it as a communal offering, and therefore it overrides Shabbos. But then there's a second factor: it has to be designated to a specific time. And if not now, when? This is the time when it has to be brought. It can't be brought any other time. There are offerings in the temple that you can bring today, you can bring tomorrow, you can bring the next day. But if it's fixed in time, it has to be brought that time, and it overrides Shabbos. So both of these explanations are hinted in Hillel's words, that this is something that is communal and is fixed in time. And that overrides the Shabbos. We can't make up our own rules. This is based on...
Is it part of like... that the Torah, the life of Torah itself is fixed? This date is fixed for the life of Torah, so it precedes the rules of Shabbos, because to not do that would take life away from Torah?
Well, the Torah mandates certain things that should be done on Shabbos, but how do we know which ones are mandated to be done on Shabbos? It's the ones that the Torah designates to be done in a specific time, and it's a communal offering. So then it's not considered a violation of the Shabbos. It's called an enhancement of the Shabbos. That's why in the temple they would bring sacrifices. The daily sacrifice, the Musaf sacrifice, were brought on Shabbos. It wasn't just permitted, it was mandated, it was required. But in order to know which sacrifices are required to be brought on Shabbos, they have to be communal and they have to be fixed in time. If the Torah gives you a few different times to do it, it doesn't override Shabbos. You can do it any other time, but if the Torah tells you you have to do it on this day, and it's a communal offering, then it overrides the Shabbos. Then there's a interpretation of this Mishnah that is taken from the earliest commentary on the Ethics of the Fathers. The Ethics of the Fathers was compiled by the rabbis of the Mishna. Those are the ones who lived in the 2nd century of the Common Era. Not too much after that, later rabbis compiled a book called Avos, Fathers, according to Rabbi Nassan. It's an interpretation of Ethics of the Fathers by one of the Talmudic sages themselves. And there, it focuses on another aspect that sometimes people say, why do I have to worry about doing the right things now? I'll catch up in the next world. Jews, we believe in the afterlife. And on Sunday, we'll be talking more about heaven and hell this Sunday, God willing. The soul lives on forever, and the soul will end up in paradise. So why do I have to worry about what I do now? I'll do it in the next world. So he says over here, no, you can't do it in the next world. You can only do it now. If you don't make an effort, no one's going to help you in the next world. Everything has to be done as long as we're still physically alive. We can't rely on the next world. That's why there's the myth that many Jews have perpetuated that Judaism doesn't believe in the afterlife, which is totally false. It's a basic Jewish belief. We don't believe that you could postpone things for the afterlife. It's what you accomplish in this world that'll determine your status in the afterlife. And more about that on Sunday, God willing. But there is certainly an afterlife, and whatever we invest, that's what we're going to get out of it. If a person didn't invest in the Social Security system, he's not going to get Social Security. You have to invest in order to reap the benefits. And even in this world, there are certain limits. There's a story with Hillel himself. Hillel was very poor, but he had a very wealthy brother. His name was Shavna. And his wealthy brother didn't support him. There's a story of how Hillel almost died because he couldn't afford to go into the academy, so he lay down on this skylight to listen into the words of Torah, and it was a snowy day, and he was covered with snow and almost frozen to death. He was so poor. But at one point, I guess when Hillel became very famous, Shavna comes to Hillel and says to him, you know what, let's make a deal. I'm going to support you from now on, and you give me half of your merit of all your Torah study of the past. And the Talmud says, you can't do that. If he had come to Hillel before he studied Torah and says, I'm going to support you, so you should be able to study Torah, he could have made a pact like that and share some of the rewards, the spiritual rewards.
But if he had done that, he wouldn't have had to ask for the merit. It would have been given to him naturally.
It would have been given to him, right. And that's the partnership between the two tribes, Yisachar and Zvulun. When the 12 tribes were apportioned sections of Israel, there were two tribes that were together, adjacent to each other. One was Yisachar, they were the scholars, and one was Zvulun, they were the merchants. And they made a pact that Zvulun, the merchants, would support the scholars. So they are given credit as if they themselves were study Torah. You can do that before the act, but you can't do it afterwards. After you study Torah, you can't say, I'm going to purchase some of your Torah study. It should accrue to my merit, to my bank account, spiritual bank account. So that's why he says, if it's not now, if you don't do it right now, if you don't make the effort now, you can't do it later. Now, there shouldn't be a misunderstanding. Tshuva, repentance, always helps. But it only helps to get rid of the negatives associated with your past. But if you didn't do the positive, your tshuva, your repentance will only get rid of the negative aspect of not doing the right thing, but the benefits, the spiritual energy that every positive mitzvah has, that you can't get back. If a person didn't give tzedakah, didn't give charity, let's say, and then they repent for it, it's too late. The poor person didn't get the money they needed for their food. The fact that you repented for it will get God to forgive you for the sin of not helping the poor, but it won't restore the help because the help was not there. You will not get the credit, and the spiritual energy that was not generated by your actions will be missing. So that's what the Mishna over here is saying. If not now, if you don't act now, it's too late. You're not going to be able to retrieve that. The Mishna gives an example. If a person misses a daily prayer, daily recitation of the Shema, you can't make it up the next day. Again, God will forgive you if you're sincere in your regret for not doing the right thing. He'll forgive you, but you just didn't miss the opportunity. If you didn't buy the lottery ticket and you missed winning $100 million, and you say, I'm sorry, I didn't buy the lottery ticket, but you're not going to get the $100 million. And a mitzvah is worth more than $100 million. Any questions? Any questions on Zoom?
I've got a quick question. What's the etymology of hematai instead of just matai?
I don't know if it's any different.
Hematai, like the when, like isn't it saying like it's a context for a specific when? The when is a specific time.
They can both be used in the same sentence. I can't think of a difference. If they just had the word matai over here.
Yeah.
By you, it just says matai.
Here it says a matai here.
Always hematai. That's the question. Is that the Mishna word? Emosaikos hima.
No, they both are used. Is it Aramaic?
I don't see where hematai is.
The last word.
The last word in Hebrew.
The last Hebrew word.
Oh, okay, I misunderstood. Forgive me. Yeah. I was wrong.
Rabbi,
Yes?
what happened to toenail?
It was removed, the ingrown toenail, and he's a lot better now.
But it was not amputated, right?
No. It never was meant to be amputated. He was just going to cut out the nail, and he misunderstood, thinking that it had to be amputated. That's what he told me.
Yeah, I was wondering why amputated.
That's about 40 years ago.
Ah, okay, thank you.
Yes.
If the reason, if we're supposed to try to do things now and not put things off into the future, is that also connected to the reason why each day we're supposed to remember as though we were liberated from our own Egypt, because it's time to do something right now
Yeah, that can be a good connection. In other words, Judaism is about every day. It says when Abraham died, it says he was ba b'yamim, he came with his days. What does that mean? He came with his days. How else do you come to a certain point in life? You come with your days. So the explanation given is that the person could do a lot of good, but not necessarily every day. So Abraham, every day had value to him. He filled in every day with meaning. There was no such thing as a day that he squandered, and he made up the next day. He did twice as much the next day. He wouldn't be coming with his days. He'd be coming with his actions. But it's not enough to come with your actions. You have to come with your days. Even though you can make it up the next day, certain things you could make up, but you're not. That day was missing. So a person could be 90 years old, 100 years old, chronologically, but in terms of with the days that had meaning, he can be a child. So what you're saying is true, that every day has to be a full-fledged day where we take the message of the Exodus in particular very seriously. Any more questions? It could be about ingrown toenails or anything medical. Yes.
Not that it changes the story irrelevant, but just curiosity. Half-Shekel is $10 in today's value.
Yeah. Okay.
But it could have been 100, and the story would have been the same, right?
Google has the answer to everything. Was that AI or Google?
Google.
Google, okay.
What about, no, what other?
It depends on, and it's a fluctuation of the price of silver. It depends on how much silver is.
Yes.
We give now the half a shekel is half a dollar.
We symbolically, on the day before Purim, we give a $50, actually $3.50, because the Torah mentions the idea of Half-Shekel 3 times. So we give to charity, we take $50, preferably silver $50, and we donate that. Some people do it for every member of their family. So that's only symbolically, because it doesn't go for sacrifices, and it's not the
Real half shekel.
it's not the real half-shekel. But the message of half is that we're only half without the other, and the other message is we're only half without God. And without God, you're not a complete human being.
And a lot of halves together is a lot of value.
Yeah, I mean, we're coming to Purim. Haman offered the king Achashverosh 10,000 silver talents to give him the license to annihilate the Jews. And the king said, you keep the money and do it as you please. So the Midrash says that God laughed when Haman said that. He says, Jews, they don't have to worry, because your half-shekel that you already gave in the past canceled the 10,000 silver talents. And there are commentaries who make a calculation that the 600,000 men between the age of 20 and 60 giving half-shekel would add up to 10,000 silver talents. They do an interesting calculation. So the half-shekel was responsible for our salvation from the threats of Haman. And that one could extrapolate from that when we recognize the Jewish unity and we feel that unity, that's the greatest strength that we have to thwart the designs of the evil Hamas people, the modern-day Hamans.
I was always fascinated by the trials of the Nazis before he was hung.
Streicher, Julius Streicher said Purim Fest 1947.
That was fascinating to me.
Yeah, and there were 10 of them who hanged, just like the 10 sons of Haman. And in the Megillah, the 3 letters within the 10 sons of Haman add up to the Hebrew date of when they were hanged.